devoted and dedicated to making it his business to stop the work of God from moving forward. That's what he was all about. And not only did he have negative feelings towards Christians, but his time was devoted to making it difficult for them to even live in the society of that day. See, he would go and he would lobby to the different leaders and the different authorities and the people in power to have permission to imprison those who put their faith in Jesus Christ. He was committed to this purpose, to this evil plan. He was passionate in his approach to stopping what God was doing in that time. He was evil and he was ruthless. Until one day, that is, when he had an encounter. One day he was knocked off his horse. We all need to be knocked off our horse every once in a while. How many people have ever been knocked off their horse? It'll catch you by surprise. It'll shake you up. You don't see it coming. And you kind of, what's going on here? And Saul had that experience because Saul thought that he was it. He had his mission and he had his purpose in life. But the thing was that God had a different plan. God had a different purpose. And Saul had an encounter with the Lord Jesus Christ that day. And he was blinded by the light that was shining from the glory of Jesus. And he was given a new direction that day. It was a direction that would radically change the course of his life because Jesus was about to make all things new in his life. Saul got a new name. He got a new start. He got a new way of living life. Saul, now Paul, became a new creation, and he took off in a completely different direction. Look at verses 19 to 22 of Acts chapter 9. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus, and once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. Drastically different, right? All those who heard him were astonished, and they asked, "Isn't he the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who call on this name? And hasn't he come here to take them as prisoners to the chief priests?" Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Messiah. Saul was redirected. Everybody say redirected. The encounter that he had with the living Jesus completely changed the direction of his life. He was going one way as Saul, but now he was going a completely different, brand new direction as Paul. As Saul, he was a murderer. He was a persecutor, a hater, a deceiver. But because Jesus makes all things new, Paul, a preacher now, a believer now, because Jesus makes all things new, every single one of us can be redirected. Give it a brand new direction, a brand new outlook on life, a brand new purpose. That's what God has promised to us when we come to faith in his Son, Jesus Christ. And sometimes, like Saul, we find ourselves on a path that may lead to destruction. Maybe we find ourselves on that road that leads to a deep, dark, devastating place. Maybe, at times, we experience the pain and the heartache of our own mistakes, our own shortcomings, our own failures, our own disobedience to the plan of God. And we find ourselves heading in a direction that we should never be on. And we find our place in a new place that's very dark. And we say those famous words, "How did I get here?" You ever found yourself in that place before? Many of us have. We choose to go our own way and invite despair and hopelessness into our hearts. It's the direction that we chose, and we deal with those consequences. And it's in moments like that that we need to have that encounter where we are knocked off our horse. And only Jesus, only the risen Son of God, can change our direction from destruction to redemption. The fact that Jesus is alive means that you and I, we don't have to continue in that downward direction that we were heading, because we can be redirected by the one who has had a plan for our life from the very beginning. It's a good plan. It's a plan not to harm us, but to prosper us. A plan to give us a hope and a future. We're used to hearing those words, but that's the plan that is waiting for us when we surrender and submit to the new direction that Jesus has for our lives. He wants to redirect someone's life this morning. Maybe it's yours, because he makes all things new. And when he makes all things new, nothing is left the same. The next person that we meet is a man. His name is Aeneas. Now Peter, another apostle, he's now traveling, much like Paul was later on in his life. Peter's traveling all around, and he's going and he's preaching the good news, and then he's going and encouraging people of faith, people who know the Lord, and he's seeing many saved and coming in to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And Peter comes to visit these believers in a place called Lydda. And there he brings them encouragement, but there he has an encounter with this man named Aeneas. Look at verse 32 of Acts chapter 9. As Peter traveled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas who was paralyzed and had been bedridden for 8 years. Now, we don't know much about Aeneas. We know just a couple of verses about his life. What we do know is that Aeneas was hanging around God's people because that's who Peter was going to encourage. So Aeneas found himself there. And we also know about him from just these couple of verses that Aeneas has a debilitating problem. He's paralyzed. And this illness is not something that only frustrated him or was inconveniencing his lifestyle. But this illness completely consumed his life because of this paralyzation. His whole life was confined to a mat, the equivalent of a bed. And he'd spend every day, all day, on that mat, not able to move around as he wished, not able to travel himself from place to place, from here to there. He was completely dependent upon other people to help him and to come to his aid. And you know, so many times we read these stories in Scripture, and like we just kind of read it like a story, and that's what happened. But have you ever stopped to put yourself in somebody's shoes? Have you ever thought what it must have been like, what it must have felt like to be Aeneas? How humiliating that he couldn't even help himself. The things that you and I do every day that we need to do every day, we're free to do. But Aeneas needed somebody to help him every step of the way. And this wasn't just a little bit of time. This was the past 8 years of his life. Imagine that for a minute. I gotta be honest, I couldn't imagine being in bed for 8 days, let alone 8 whole years. But this was his life. This is all that he had. You have to understand that after 8 years, I'm sure that Aeneas had most likely come to grips with this illness was nothing more than a long, drawn-out death sentence. He probably had already come to grips with the fact that this would be how his life would end. That he would live on this mat for the rest of whatever life he had, and then it would be all over. He had to have imagined that eventually he would make one move in life, and that would be from this mat that he was laying on to the grave that he would one day spend the rest of his time in. And many times, in those long periods of despair, those long trials, those periods in our life where we just feel so broken and so helpless, so many people choose in those moments to give up, to throw in the towel. We've been talking about that with our young adults ministry. We've been talking about how the struggle is real and about how there's so many people who aren't contending in their faith. They're not fighting for the things that God has promised them. It just gets too hard and they give up. Losing hope, weakening faith, fading confidence. And after a period of time, we start to think that we've been forgotten. We think that maybe God is somewhere else doing something else more important than what we need. Has anybody ever bought into that lie before? Come on. We all fall into that sometimes. We all have hopelessness enter our life at one point or another. That's what the disciples experienced. After 3 years of walking with Jesus, being right by his side for every miracle, every teaching, man, they experienced like they got close with him. And then one day, all of a sudden, he's arrested, put on trial, and Jesus is dead. And the disciples are walking around. Man, they're depressed. They're dejected because Jesus is gone. They didn't know what was coming. Pastor kind of spoke last week of Mary Magdalene, right? We see her at the tomb, right? She comes to that empty tomb. Oh no, they've taken the body of Jesus. The plan is ruined. How can Jesus rise from the dead if somebody stole his body? They didn't get it. They think that it's over. So many times we think that it's over and it's finished. This is it. And we've all gotten to that place before. We all lose hope every once in a while. We think that other things have the final say. We think that the doctor has the final word, or our employer has the final word. We think that whatever our bank statement says is the final say. We think that our spouse maybe has the final say, or you fill in the blank. But we think that everybody else or everything else has the final word. But we forget that Jesus has the final word. And do you know what he says? You know what his final word is? His final word is, I make all things new. I make all things new. That's the final word. Look at Revelation chapter 21. It says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. Verse 4, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, for the old order of things has passed. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. This is the plan of God. He has the final say, and he says, I make all things new. He restores. The plan of God is that he restores. Aeneas was about to find out that even though he had experienced pain and immobility for the past 8 years of his life, even though he was bound by disease and hindered by a condition, he was about to be restored. And this morning, somebody here in this room is about to be restored. Look at Acts chapter 9, verse 34. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up, roll up your mat, and immediately, it says immediately, Aeneas got up. Jesus sent his word, and Aeneas was healed instantly and immediately. Aeneas was restored 100%. Now, the Bible doesn't say this, but this is my take on things. My thought process is this. I don't think that the way Jesus does things is just taking something that's broken and restoring it back to the way that it was. I think he makes it better than it ever was. And so I believe that Aeneas experienced something that was better than life before his paralyzation. I believe that Aeneas had stronger muscles and stronger bones and more mobility than he ever had in his life, because Jesus restores things back to better than he found them. That's what I believe. Do you need to be restored today? Do you need to be restored today? Are there areas in your life that are broken? There may be. We all have them. Maybe there's an area of your life that has been paralyzed for the past 8 years, and you are bound by your current situation. Maybe you've let that dream go. Maybe you've let it die. Maybe you've given up on the hopes that you've once had. Maybe God showed you a promise, and you could see it, you could almost touch it. But now it seems so far gone, out of reach, and you've even stopped extending your hand to try and get it. Maybe it's more than that. Perhaps you've bought into the lie this morning that you're just too broken to be fixed. And you couldn't be more wrong. Maybe you're under the impression that your poor choice convinced yourself that right here on this mat you're going to be sitting for the rest of your life, spiritually, emotionally, relationally paralyzed. But you need to understand this morning that Jesus restores. He restores. And the present pain is nothing compared to the coming promise of restoration. He gives life. He restores. We sang that earlier today. He did it for Aeneas. And he'll do it for us here this morning.